Okay, as I continue to fill in the background, one thing I want you to notice is that the value, I'm changing the color, but the value is fairly close, everything that's behind the boat. And I want to be able to keep those values really close together so they sit back in space. But mainly, I have a busy subject. The boat has got a lot going on. And the last thing I want to do is add more busyness behind it. And so I'm going to keep that simple and keep those values really close together back there, even when I add a little bit of detail here and there. And I'm not going to put everything that's in the background. It's just like there's a boat even further behind, and that's just going to add a little bit more confusion. So I just want to keep everything, those values are more in the midtones. They've got to be in kind of a range between kind of a 3 and a 4 value. And it will sit back there also because not only the value, but you can see the saturation level back there is lessened. It's got more white in it, which helps desaturate it and cool it. So even though I'm using, warm colors like the oranges, the yellows, and the violets, by putting all that white in them, that just kind of neutralizes them and keeps them cool in the back. Okay, one thing that's a little tricky is that the horizon line, or basically where the back bank is, comes really close and dangerously close to the top of the boat. And so I need to make sure that it's just a little bit higher and it doesn't go as a tangent right next to the top of the boat. Now, as I'm adding the shadow side on these buildings and kind of dividing them up a little bit, I just want to make sure that I keep some variety in the spacing of the buildings because I don't want it to look too static back there, especially when I have so much dynamic spacing going on in the boat. If I have it really kind of static and things are really metered and measured, it will really stick out like a sore thumb. Now, as I'm painting along the boat, I'm also being careful once I get up next to the boat itself and start carving in some of the shapes. And actually, that's where my drawing really takes place, is when I'm putting the background against the shape of the boat. That is where I'm shaping things, I'm creating the edge, and that is kind of the essence of drawing in a very painterly style. And so in some ways, I'm cutting into the form that I created in order to create exactly what I want in the drawing. And that's very different from people who have a really strong drawing and then just kind of paint right up to the edges and kind of fill around the edges. This way is how Sargent, Roy, and Zorn often worked, and less like somebody like Jacques-Louis David or Ingres or any of those more academic painters, where they really put in a real clean drawing first and then just kind of fill it in. So all the edges have to some degree, a little bit of a more uniformity to it. And this is one of the reasons why I really recommend, for the same reason that I'm painting the background in behind the boat to shape it, is why I would put the sky in later instead of at the beginning. If I were doing more of a landscape and painting some trees, I would paint the tree first and the sky after, because that's how I get to shape the edge of the tree, is by painting the sky after the fact. And so it's just a different method, right, of how to tackle the painting, because it'll give you a little bit different feeling in the way the brush stroke is applied to the surface. And I find that it has just a little bit more emotional energy going into the work when you paint this way, rather than the academic methods. I find that those things are a little too static and a little too boring, quite frankly. There might be some greater level of refinement and patience going into some of that work, but it just doesn't evoke a whole lot of strength and emotion. And those are things that are important to me as an artist.